Hey guys, Nike here. I wanted to do a little guide for something that I've never actually seen anyone do before, and that is a guide to the food that we use for DPS in dungeons. I'm going to go through all the popular foods and talk about when you'd want to use them and what the DPS effects are. First and foremost, we'll start with the big one, and that's sweet and spicy butternut squash soup. This one is quite expensive. I think they're like 36 silver on the trading post right now. And they give you 100 power and 10% critical damage. For the purposes of the calculations that I'm going to go into, as far as percentages, I'm assuming that you're going to be running the typical warrior 30-25-0-0-15 build with full berserker and stacking bloodlust. I was going to stack perception like I tell you to do in my guide, but it kind of skewed the numbers because it made food that added precision to be worthless, since you're already at 99% chance to crit with the perception stacks. Whereas if you if you use bloodlust, it makes both the power and precision food worth doing. So this is the best, or not necessarily the best, but the most expensive food in the game. And with this build, that food's going to give you a buff of 6.45% DPS. That's a pretty strong buff, but it, again, is quite expensive. Moving on to the next most common food. This one's pretty expensive as well. I think they're like 20 silver. The curry butternut squash soup. In a typical DPS build like this, that's going to give you a buff of 6.49%, which is slightly better than the power one. And the reason is because with all of our buffs on, you'll be at 88% chance to crit. So you benefit a lot from that precision from that food. Obviously, if you were stacking perception and you're already at 99% chance to crit, the precision wouldn't do much for you, so you just have to be aware. The next one I like is butternut squash soup. I think it's a good value. It's like 7 silver, 8 silver, and it gives you what works out to be a 5.72% DPS increase. It is, overall, when you're just going for straight DPS, it's a pretty good value, but there are better values out there, and that's what I'll get into. Another good value are Minotaur Stakes. They give you 60 precision and 6% critical damage, which works out to be a 4.2% DPS boost. It kind of drops off pretty drastically from the butternut squash soup, but it sort of is what it is. But they are quite cheap. I think they're like 2 or 3 silver each. Now going on to the cheapest of the cheap, we have steak and asparagus. 80 power, 60 precision. People kind of overlook this food. They think it's rubbish. It's just a bunch of junk, and it's only a couple copper. But steak and asparagus is a 4.1% DPS boost. So it's basically the same DPS boost that you get from Minotaur Stakes, but it costs just a handful of copper. So whenever I'm mindlessly doing stuff, I'm just going to pop these. If it's not like a guild run or anything special, these are fine. And it's definitely a lot cheaper than buying Minotaur Steaks, and definitely a lot cheaper than bowls of butternut squash soup. If you want to spend a little bit more coin, you can get the level 80 version, the Truffle Steak, 100 power, 70 precision, and that is a very good buff. The Truffle Steak is a 6.45% buff. So the Truffle Steak actually gives you the same DPS boost that sweet and spicy butternut squash soup gives you in this build. That's pretty impressive. This is about 1/10 the price of this, and the Truffle Steak gives you the same killing power. I'm a big fan of these. They are pretty good, and they're cheap, so you can't go wrong. Next we have candy dragon rolls, or omnumberry pies, or omnumberry ghosts, whatever you call them. 70 precision and 66% chance to steal life on crit. if you just factor in the precision and don't worry about the lifesteal, it's giving you only about a 2% DPS boost. When you factor in the lifesteal, you're probably looking at somewhere around a 3 to 4% DPS boost. So all told, it's a pretty darn good DPS boost. It won't make your numbers necessarily as big as some of the other foods, but it will make your kill times that much faster. So you definitely want to go with these. They're currently creeping up in price because the vendor that gives them out is no longer available until the end of the Halloween update. So if you don't have these stockpiled, now is probably a good time to get them. Either that or just wait for the next availability. Moving on, one of the last ones that I use a lot are Dragon's Breath Buns. These are a generic, good DPS food, quite cheap, along similar price to the Candy Dragon Roll. They give you 200 power for 30 seconds after killing an enemy, and 10% crit damage. So it has two modes. It has the when you haven't killed an enemy and when you have. When you have not killed an enemy and you're just getting the 10% crit damage, it works out to be a 3.68% DPS increase. So it's on the lower side of the foods we looked at when it's just that. However, for the 30 seconds after you've killed an enemy, it works out to be a 9.2% DPS increase. That's huge. That's bigger than any food available in the game, and these are less than a silver each. So when would this be the right choice to make? If you're just fighting a dungeon where you're just skipping from boss to boss, like COF or like even a Raw, and there's not too many trash mobs, this isn't really going to work out for you. It's not going to be that great. When you're fighting an instance, however, where there's a lot of trash mobs and most of the obstacles are overcoming trash mobs, that's when these shine because you're constantly going to have that max boost. So I basically break these out for fractals, like especially the Dredge Fractal or the Harpy Fractal or the Ascalon Fractal, or even the Underwater Fractal where you're just fighting a series of trash mobs. It's quite good for that, and it helps you burn through those trash mobs that much faster. Another thing I looked into while I was doing the math for this were maintenance oils and sharpening stones. The sharpening stones you see, you gain a percent of power equal to a percent of your toughness, and you gain power equal to a percent of your vit. I don't actually have the good ones because they're expensive and they don't do as much as you'd hope. And normally when I'm in a dungeon, I'm going to use like a dungeon-specific slaying potion because the DPS of 10% just can't be beat. However, when you're in a dungeon like Ascalonian Catacombs or certain fractals, and you don't have access to a dungeon potion that does anything for you, sharpening stones and maintenance oils are pretty good. So in those situations, you want to use the ones that are 6-4. Those are the tier 6 ones. They're the best. The sharpening stone, the one that adds power, is going to give you a 2.45% DPS increase. And the maintenance oils are going to give you a 2.64% DPS increase. So the maintenance oils in this particular build are slightly better than the sharpening stones. So that about wraps it up for this build. I guess the general thing I would say in summary is to have Dragon's Breath Bun, if you want to worry about value, is to have Dragon's Breath Buns for when you're fighting lots of trash mobs. For general runs where you're trying to be cheap, either use plates of Truffle Steak or Butternut Squash Soup. And when you want to go for a super speed run, break out the good stuff, either the curry butternut squash soup or the spicy butternut squash soup. So in the description of this video, I have included a link to my spreadsheet that calculates all this stuff for me, what the percentages were. You can change the numbers around to suit your build, no matter what profession you're playing, and it will tell you what each food's going to do for you, and it'll help you make the right decision. If you have any questions about that, hit me up in the comments. But until next time, thanks for watching.